Okay, here I am. I'm talking on the microphone. Can you hear me? I'm talking to Brett and probably Chaley, and I'm wondering if you hear it. Do you hear what I'm saying? We're just talking here, and my picture is kind of purple. I can't get the podium to be balanced, but if I balance the screen and the light in the room, then the podium is off. So this can be interesting. Microphone in my what? Yeah. Check, check, check. There you go. But that's really heavily delayed. It's like, it doesn't matter, but it's like 15 seconds off or a minute off. Let me go stand on stage and Sarah will zoom in on me and I'll talk. And you see if at least it's synchronized there. Okay, I'm going to get up there and you can zoom in tight, Sarah. I'm going to stand up here on the podium and you can see if I'm lip synced. Can you see my lips? I'm talking. I'm in multiple places at the same time. Check, check. It's here. Tell me when you see me on the podium. Wow, they're not going to know it's a delay, so that's okay as long as I'm in sync, right? I'm walking up there, it'll take a while. Weird. They're not going to know the difference because we're not doing a Zoom feed back in. I'm doing sounds with my mouth and you can see it. Okay, that's all I care about. All right. Okay. And the audio's good? It sounds good? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, good, we're good. And so what'll happen is when they have their 15-minute break, she could just leave it up running because she doesn't have, I could actually put a graphic into the switcher. Yeah. So I just need to get a graph. I feed it. If you could email me a graphic, I can embed it into the program. We'll be back soon, one of those. Okay. All right. I'm off the mic. There he is. Hi, I'm right here. It's working. It is indeed. I'm sailing.
So, do you want a graphic before they start, or do you want it just live?
So we either do it in the vMix or the switcher. The vMix does it just fine. Yeah. We can look at this with the vMix.
Oh, thank you.
I don't even know what I did with my phone. Brussels sprouts. That's just order from Belgium. I'll have the same as him, just hold the ketchup and put lettuce and tomato on it. Yeah, that's fine.
What's on the cheeseburger?
Lettuce and tomato.
Lettuce.
You want cheddar?
I want everything.
And Milo just, Milo did make an announcement as well, and now, someone's consequences.
Mini burger, pulled pork, and burger.
Yes, a cheeseburger, cheddar cheese.
Medium well.
I'll take a medium.
Cheeseburger, medium with cheddar and everything on it.
Everything except ketchup. On my
Do
burger.
you want fries?
No, I'm okay.
All right.
Okay, so,
Here you go. So,
what we got, oh, the graphic.
do you want to have a graphic in the beginning and a graphic in the middle?
Install the
You
program.
don't have to.
Here, you take it.
Yeah, so if you can just tell me what you want,
We've got a graphic to download, and we're gonna put it into
where are you going to? You are going into Evernote.
Dropbox.
So
Oh, I wanted Evernote to get the password, and then told me how to download the
you don't
application.
have to.
All right.
I don't think there's a password to that process. I don't know why this computer is asking me for a password.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
You don't have to. So where are we going to stack images?
Yep.
No, he's doing DOT.
Black background, white background?
Like that, and then there should be one for breakout day one, or breakout session one. Is Rob Van just got switched into here? You guys heard, sorry, pardon? Rob Van just got switched into here, you guys heard that? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Broadband. Yeah, the
Yes.
broadcast.
No, Rob Van, tribal Rob Van.
Oh, and the name. That's the name of this program.
Okay, so we are,
Jay just came in and told me that it's coming in here, but I guess there's enough interest that they want to do this.
Yeah, when you said broadband, that's we're streaming, so it
yeah,
kind of should be on.
Mike is super generic, right? Breakout session day one.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah, I think that's what we need.
Yes, yeah, and then, okay, and then we're not gonna change it for the second session.
No, I think you can just leave that. The only thing that is not, I don't know if Nathan updated in there are the day one, not this day one slide, but the regular day one slide, because it just said tribal governance. It's supposed to be tribal self-governance. So there was an update to that, but I don't know if those updated slides are in here.
But it doesn't, we can
This
have
one's
that.
fine, right? Okay. So I'm downloading it now. Wow.
It's huge. What size
What are
is it?
you, what is this downloading? Final zip?
Yeah, it's downloaded. You're downloading everything, the whole finals folder, not just that image.
So she'll have day two and everything else.
Yeah, you'll have day 2, day 3, you'll have all the videos.
I have this one already now.
Okay, where did it go?
I'm going to.
So actually, this is for the moderator.
Okay.
To introduce you.
Okay. That's right. No problem.
Yeah, because I know that, I read it wrong, it's 28 hours.
Yeah, it'll be good. I'll just have that, polling sign, then I'll hit, the stream for here, and then when we go to the 15-minute break, I
so we assumed it was gonna move again, and here we are. But I have
The
your,
broadband session is here.
yeah,
Okay.
and I
This
have
is
your
not
intro
David,
notes.
the agenda on the other side, and the text is right. Oh, perfect.
This is your introduction for myself and you.
Thank you.
No problem.
So does that mean are you moderating this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I'm with you.
Something I should do to make sure the moderator had what she needed. Thank you. Now where I'm supposed to be. Where
I
are
went
you?
upstairs to the frequency ballroom.
Okay.
Itself, it is not upstairs.
So, are you guys going to sit down
I
here?
don't know, I was gonna wait till Gene showed up and,
Okay.
we get that.
So,
I think there are chairs up there at the moment. And his PowerPoint presentation was loaded on that computer and was on that screen when I was sitting there earlier, so I'm not sure if it needs to migrate or if there is a central file where they can get it, but it is on the computer. And Jay was in there.
okay, since we're going to be
When you're done doing everything over LiveStream, that's a good question. Let's go look at the social box. It may be, because if the player is only playing.
I just say give a two-shot, the person talking on the screen.
Oh, okay, I see. So, we are here, but you'll have to.
Yeah, I say,
I can't. I'll go again. I'm not sure if they have internet here. Why don't we check this out? I can bring, is this computer? Jay right there? Jay, well done. Do you have it on the cloud somewhere, Jay?
It's on this USB.
Oh, you gotta stay. All right. Oh, they did? Okay. That's good. Jay, I got it. Cool. Everybody see it? Yeah. So,
But you're not playing any audio.
yeah, it's ridiculous. So I've had all 4 shots and, you test positive with no symptoms. You're like, oh, this is ridiculous. And then I had a little bit of congestion, so I was waiting for that to go away still. I started testing again. Yeah. I tested Friday and it didn't clear and I thought, all right.
Matthew, do you remember what the name? What the name of the presentation? Do you see it on one of these?
No.
Oh, the Gene. I'm sorry.
Is this your,
Gene, which one?
yeah, no.
Hey, Gene, which presentation?
I think he's into the, could you see any, when that bell went off here, could you see audio in there?
Yeah, I think right there.
I heard it in the house.
And they want.
So it should have gone through. I was wondering if it went
Yeah,
through
so
the camera.
I had to wait till I tested clear and then I was like, I'm coming. But that's the thing with this COVID stuff is that.
Did you see that?
Yeah. That's the problem. The airplane's full of people. Yeah. I know, so.
It's hard.
Just watch
Sorry, I'm
the,
not used to things.
watch the
I'm Jennifer
videos, or you can
McLaughlin,
look at it on the broadcast. There's your videos there.
So I just wanted to make sure on the recognition, I didn't know if you guys wanted to sit here or
I don't know, how do you want to go? Do you want to go put chairs up there or do you want to stay down?
It went through the house, so it's, the house is coming out of this mixer which you got.
I couldn't hear it back here though. So did you want to?
You can hear it?
I could not hear it.
Oh, so it must be coming out of this. We'll have to ask if anybody's running video. But you can hear me, right? I'm showing up on the view, so right? Okay.
I'll get
The
them.
question is anybody have video coming out of the computer? I mean, not video, I mean audio.
No, there's no audio.
Okay, no audio. And are you,
Just me.
you're presenting the whole thing?
No, he's done the first PowerPoint and then I'm presenting. I don't have a PowerPoint because that laptop has internet.
Good
I
question.
don't need it, but it would be cool if it had it.
Let me look.
And the title slide has a typo in it.
It does. Oh, a perfectionist.
Well, I spell broadband a different way.
Let me see if this has
Rad band is on.
Rad Band.
When I was going through, looking at the things, I had to spell rad band correctly. Oh, did you? Oh, funny.
See if I got it.
Well, I think we're gonna broadcast it out, so likely record it. No problem. But yeah, I don't know if that.
Hey, Mandy.
If it does, I'll show a couple of them. I guess we'll queue up.
I've got to go back in the ballroom and talk to him with Chaley.
Sure, I'll grab it for you.
No, Chaley. No, I've got to call him on the phone.
I don't know if we should steal from there or we can steal from the back.
Well, you can. What were you going to email him?
I got it. Do you just land this money? Yeah. I landed it like.
You can send that to him, and then I'll talk to him.
Early exit from my house like 3:30, 3:40 in the morning. Oh, yeah. And then I'm going right back. It's just too much going on this week.
Yeah, it's tough to, it's very tough to travel.
They were supposed to supply that, weren't they? They didn't. Isn't that why you had to write down all the license plates?
There's no variety of flights anymore. You used to be able to just switch gears and jump on a different flight.
Yeah,
The only directs were first thing in the morning and last thing out.
yeah.
Otherwise, I had to go like backwards. I had to go like Portland to go down to San Diego, or go all the way to Phoenix.
Let's
San
check.
Diego.
Yeah.
Add like 3 hours to your trip. Yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, quick trip today.
All right, let me call you back. I'm testing something here. I'll call you back in a couple minutes, okay?
Today, it's probably
Bye.
a pretty good conference to be at more often.
Okay, let's go to Google Chrome.
Yeah.
Let's do speed test.
Yeah, I sat through the whole morning till about 11 something, and yeah, it was good. And then just the number of people that I've had a chance to interact with, who I know from either National
Okay.
Congress of American Indians or something.
You have internet.
It does have internet,
Yeah,
and it's actually beating the FCC definition of broadband.
yeah, it's 32 megabits per second down, and it's even higher going up. That's interesting.
Up is always higher, because down is always in use.
Right, but in my studio,
Well, if you upload,
huh?
if you're a heavy
It's just-
uploader,
Yeah,
well, if it's symmetrical, typically what happens is more people are using the download at the same time, so the
Right.
upload is empty.
I never see that at my studio because I have,
Cox or Comcast.
no, I have, what's it called? I can't remember the name of it. Too crazy today. Okay, let's get out of here.
Starlink.
I have dedicated IPs.
Oh,
So I have
static
five static IPs. So that,
changes the game.
yeah,
Yeah, so I have a gigabit service symmetrical at home.
there we go. Back to the slides.
Cool.
So,
Perfect. So I can just escape out of there and go to the internet. I'll go second.
okay.
Because what I want to do is just show a couple of websites for some.
Yeah, but no audio.
Nope.
Okay. I wonder if I
I'll do
can
the
play
audio.
something.
I'll do the audio.
Let's just test it.
Actually, you know what? Before we start, why don't I just bookmark those pages or open them?
Okay, yeah, let me just check something in case,
Yeah.
because just you two?
Just us two, and there's
Oh.
no audio streaming from the
Okay.
laptop at all.
All right.
What are you
So,
using, Chrome or are you using Safari?
this
Safari's
Chrome.
dead.
Huh?
Okay, Safari's dead now, isn't it? I'm
No.
not Safari, but
No, but it's more
what do you
like,
call it? Internet Explorer's dead.
it's more like an Apple thing, so who knows what's happening.
Yeah, okay. All right, so
All right, you're good to go. And you saw there was a graphic on there for opening.
yeah,
I'm actually living in North Carolina, but Jamestown is located in Washington State.
Okay.
People have drinks. I didn't know if you needed water.
well, thank you. Hopefully not.
I'll grab you a couple of drinks.
Cool. All right, so I will
minimize this. And I will go back to your presentation. Cool. And then, did you have an intro slide? Or this is the intro slide? No, this is your intro slide, right, Gene? Yeah. So I don't know if there was a conference intro slide or not, but whatever.
You scroll through them just by
Should
the
be
arrow?
just arrows. Or
Maybe space.
Oh, this one, these ones.
Oh.
Right. Yep.
Oh, you're right.
Left. There you go.
Oh, okay. Good.
And I think there is a remote if you want to walk around. Those are super advanced as well.
Can you pronounce your last name for me, one?
Try it.
Rantanen?
That's the European version.
Okay.
Rantanen is the American version, so either way is good.
Rantanen,
Yeah.
okay. Rantanen.
Rantanen. Yeah, it's from Finland actually. My grandfather came over when he was 11. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Fun story. Tickets on the Titanic. Traded it for tickets on the Lusitania. Thank you, Grandpa.
Really?
Yeah, his mom was waiting for her sister, and she couldn't make it, so they traded up to the Lusitania. Came over on the Lusitania, and then it got sunk by the Bismarck. Going back across one trip, yeah. Yeah, it's a close call.
Chance of that.
I know. I like that. I've already won the lottery. But yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. And they sent mail on the Titanic to the U.S. because her husband was here. My grandfather's stepdad, he's a blacksmith, and he was in the U.S. Working. And of course, he never got the mail on the Titanic. So when they heard the Titanic went down, he assumed they all died.
Oh, yeah.
So then they show up like a month later on the Lusitania, and he was like, "What?"
Wow.
Yeah, totally bizarre. Yeah.
That is interesting history.
crazy history.
That's something to talk about.
I know, right? And my tribal side's from Alberta. They decided 120 years ago that Canada was not the place. They all came into the northern Idaho. I'm like, why would you go to northern Idaho from Canada?
No, not much different.
No.
Yeah,
Could you step up to the
is-
podium for me so I can get a color balance?
You want me to scan? Okay. Oh, it creaks. You're welcome.
Yeah, that's a bonus feature of the creature business.
My great grandmother is from Newfoundland, Canada.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Arcadian French.
Oh, wow.
All the Cajun people
Yeah.
down in Louisiana that got deported out by the British.
Yeah. All right.
But
Put
my
it in the
rel-
swamp.
Yeah, my relatives stayed up there, so they must have run north.
Yeah, I mean, there was, so the northern Idaho, the panhandle's all forests, so it was a real easy place to just go disappear. I mean, to this day, when we're elk hunting and stuff, when you're close enough to the Canadian border, you just walk right across them. There's no surveillance or anything in those mountains. They're like, if you're foolish enough to cross up here, you do it. You can navigate the grizzlies and the wolves and the freezing. Yeah, but
Did you guys have a breakout of like how long you're gonna speak, or you just gonna kind of go with the flow?
we want to
or-
open for questions at the end, right? And
Okay.
that's, what, 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, probably. I'll go through the slide pretty quick, I think.
So
I
we'll
use
split.
probably like 15 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll split 20 minutes apiece, and then we'll just go for questions and see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah,
All right.
hopefully there's
Okay.
more people can show up.
According to Jay, a lot of people were indicating that this was where they wanted to be, also online.
Yeah.
So that's why they switched it to here,
Yeah,
because this is streamed,
yeah.
which is funny, because if I wasn't going to make it, I asked them if I could attend through Zoom. They don't have streaming capabilities in every room, but now we do.
Yeah.
Things
But yeah,
are
it's the whole.
changing quickly.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's all the jitters of starting over again after 2019,
Well, we've just gotten a lot of flight cancellations of speakers aren't showing up, and
that's why I went so early this morning, first flight out of San Diego, because I figured I'd have another flight buffer if I got bumped or something.
My flight got canceled.
Oh,
I
wow.
came in 2 days ago, so,
Oh.
but, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people are having problems like that. I was lucky, I didn't have any problems.
I've only had one cancellation in the last 7 trips that I've had since everything kind of opened up. And, you know,
Agree.
if you're a seasoned enough traveler, back in the day, you could just get on your app and change on the fly, and you could beat everybody that went and lined up to figure it out, and you could be done with it. Now there's no flights left.
Right.
There's no seats left,
Right.
and unless you have some really high-end priority, or you decide to take it first class, you can't really do that anymore. But I've been in a couple situations where first class was only $100 more, and I jumped on a first class flight to get out because that was the only way to get out. I thought, $100, I'll eat it. Yeah, it's been crazy. Just the sheer number of flights that they've reduced has caused so much chaos. And airports I used to love to fly through are now nightmares, like Phoenix. Phoenix is terrible. It's a madhouse. And people are at odds with each other and screaming at each other.
Yeah, I don't really understand it. I mean, it used to be because a lot
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
just,
I'll give you one more minute.
well, not to mention, you guys switched rooms again. So now is it on the signage outside?
That I don't know if they switched it up yet. So.
That would be a problem.
This is my duty station. I'm not allowed to.
Go outside the big room. You need to change signs, that's not your job.
No, Jay was out there running back, so I'm sure he has someone on it.
I'm sure he did. Scared him away. I think they look in here and say, do I recognize anybody?
Because Jay, I thought, Jay came up to me and said, it's in this room. So I didn't even look at the agenda.
No, well, it's changed, as of yesterday, it was in the room still. Yeah. It wasn't this one, it's the better rooms. Oh. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So I just wanted to let everyone know that this is the Access to Broadband in Tribal Communities session. We're going to get started now. I want y'all to know that this is also the session that's going to be broadcast over the internet for folks that have virtual access to the conference. So my name is Jennifer McLaughlin, and I am the Legislative Associate for the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe. I also serve on the Self-Governance Advisory Committee as the Tribal Technical Co-Chair. So access to broadband, we all know from the past couple years how important, and way beyond that, how important broadband is to tribal communities. Reliable broadband and internet allows tribal nations to access critical education, healthcare, economic and public safety resources, and numerous federal programs can help ensure tribal nations and their citizens have access to this broadband. So during this session, we're hoping that you'll learn about how to access broadband, the current issues, and some resources available to increase access. We have two esteemed presenters today, Jean DeJordy. Jean DeJordy is an attorney, entrepreneur, and telecom business owner, director of the tribal nonprofit organization. Over the years, Jean has been on the forefront of the telecom and broadband industries, establishing one of the first mobile wireless networks on tribal lands. During the early days of cellular, building the first and the largest competitive universal service provider after passage of the Telecom Act of 1996, advising communications companies and tribal governments on legal, regulatory, telecom, broadband, and business development, and establishing a nonprofit foundation providing digital literacy training on tribal lands. Matthew Rantanen. Matthew is a director of technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association and director of the Tribal Digital Village Network initiative for 21 years, designing and deploying networking, supporting tribal communities of Southern California. Matthew is also currently the senior advisor for tribal broadband at the Golden State Network, focusing on tribal opportunities in the governor's middle mile efforts. So can we give a warm welcome to our speakers? And we will, we have some mics on the floor, so the last 15 minutes or so of the session, we'll invite folks to come up if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'm pleased to be here today for a couple of reasons. One, I've worked in tribal areas for quite some time now, and it made me think back to when it all began, at least in terms of my involvement, and that was in 1999 when there was a tornado that hit the town of Aguala on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and Joe Red Cloud contacted me and said, the emergency personnel didn't have any access to communications, which was surprising. I was living in Seattle at the time, and I said I'd see what we could do. And so we ended up putting some cows out there, which in our vernacular, that was cell on wheels. We put cell on wheels out there, and we provided communication services to emergency personnel in the town of Iguala during rescue efforts. So that was my first involvement, and then over the years I've continued to work in the tribal area as well as in the telecommunications and broadband area in general. And as you know, access to broadband service is essential. People have been talking about it for years, especially policymakers in DC, and more recently, we've seen the policymakers, the legislators, the regulators make more funding available for broadband services, and especially in tribal areas. Whether that funding is sufficient or not, that's probably up for debate, and how people get access to the funding is problematic. But what I hope to do today is kind of walk through some of the challenges out there from a high-level perspective in terms of getting access to funding, and what you would need in order to support a broadband network, because funding is really just one part of it, as you know. So, here we are 23 years later after access to basic telephone service was an issue, and now it seems like access to broadband service is an issue. And this was kind of highlighted by the pandemic, as you know, when everybody went to remote learning, telemedicine. We needed access to broadband services, and what it showed us is that many areas, not just tribal areas, but many areas of the country, especially in rural areas, they may have had access to broadband technically, but did it work? And how, as you well know, if you get access to broadband services, it sounds good, but are you able to stream video? Are you able to carry on a Zoom conference? Are you able to get access to the content that you need is another story. This slide, this whole presentation, if you don't have access to it, I can make it available to you. Just let me know, and you can send me an email or whatever, and I can send it to you, so you don't have to feel like you have to copy anything down. Or I have some business cards up here. You can take one, and I can give you, send you an email with a slide on it. But one of the functions that I do is I'm the director of the Native American Yes We Can Foundation, and we help with digital literacy on tribal lands. So, broadband, this is kind of what I was talking about. So originally I worked in DC on public policy issues, both within Congress as well as at the Federal Communications Commission. And one of the things that always strikes me is the difference of perspectives. And as you know, everybody looks at things in different ways, right? So you have the tribal community perspective, which is there's a very limited availability of broadband service out there, and then if it is available, it may not be affordable. So I think that's a real world perspective. You got the service providers out there that, generally speaking, national or regional service providers, right? And from their perspective, they're making broadband available. And I'll show in a slide further on how that perspective is highlighted by some of their maps that show coverage. They'll say broadband is generally available, but it may not actually be available. And then you get the policymakers' perspective, which is that they're making funding available. They're doing what they think they need to do in order to bridge the digital divide. But is it really being effective? So all these different players have these different perspectives, and maybe in each of their own minds they're correct. But I think the tribal perspective is the right perspective, because that's the real world perspective. So then the question is, how do you bridge this disconnect that's out there between the different perspectives, and how do you close that disconnect? And So what we've seen out there is that there are broadband grants available, and a lot more have been made available through, through COVID-related funding in Congress. But you also have the high-cost universal support program that's managed by the FCC. You got the Lifeline, and you probably heard the ACP program, which provides discounts for broadband services. You got targeted funds for schools and libraries. There's certain alliances that exist between service providers and tribes. There's certain business arrangements being made in some cases, but usually those are in the more urban areas. And I think one main area that needs to be addressed is really how can the tribes make it known to the policymakers that there are issues out there. And a lot of times what I've seen is that you have individual tribes that are advocating for things in Washington, but as a whole, you're not seeing that concerted effort. And that's difficult, if not impossible, to do, because as you may know, in D.C., the way things work is constant lobbying. So you kind of constantly have this lobbying presence out there. You have to constantly be before Congress and the FCC in order to get the, get the results or the benefits that you're looking for. And that's many times difficult, if not impossible, to do for some. So the grants that exist out there, I mean, it sounds really good because, if you get a grant, you get basically money to build a broadband network. So obviously that would be a preferred solution. And now there's more and more grants being made available, and I'll talk about some of those grants. The cons of grants is that, it provides funding for the initial deployment of the cost of capital expenditures, but it doesn't necessarily address operating expenditures. It doesn't address ongoing capital expenditures. So there's a lot more to it than just the grant money that would be used to address CapEx, like building a fiber network or putting up cell sites. There's still plenty of other components that need to be addressed, and some of those things can be addressed with other sources of funding. So where is this money coming from? Now there's those historical funds that are made available through BIA, Department of Interior. There's several $1 million there, but the big fund that's out there now is NTIA's Tribal Broadband Program, and that program was established last year, and they made approximately $1 billion available for broadband deployment on tribal lands. And I'll talk about that program, and it's the biggest program that has ever been put forth to address broadband deployment in tribal areas. So it's well intentioned. And so that program, as I mentioned, is $1 billion, $980 million to be exact. The application deadline was September 1, so you pass the deadline to submit an application. Now, I think most tribes, and probably many of the tribes represented here, have submitted applications, whether you know it or not. That's some component of the tribe that may have submitted an application. Now, that those funds were originally earmarked to be made available in 2021, and so that was $1 billion, and you can see that would have a meaningful impact on the deployment of broadband in tribal lands. But to date, 83 million. It's actually, I think it was updated just like yesterday or today, and it's $91 million that now has been made available. So out of the 980 million, 91 has been made available or has been awarded. It maybe it's not technically available yet. And so NTIA is kind of slowly going through the process, which is, you think of it, this funding was made available for COVID-related reasons, and there was some urgency to it. It was supposed to be made available last year, and here we are going into August, and a fraction of it has been made available. So it's good, obviously, that, the funding's there, but I'm sure for all the applicants, they're looking and saying, well, where's the money? So once the funding is made available, but then, that's just the first step in the process, as you have to, find the vendors who are going to help deploy the network. You have to operate it, maintain it. You have to have a business continuity plan. So there's a lot more to, getting that broadband network up and running than just getting the funding. So, as it now looks like, it's going to be several years before, some of that money is actually seen and realized in terms of broadband availability in tribal areas. This is a map, and when you get a chance, you'll be able to go through it on your own. But it's a website that tracks the funding that's being made available through this NTIA program. And as you can see, this was made a couple days ago. Oh, sorry. So it's clicking on my screen, but I guess not clicking there. Do you know why this would? So it's clicking on the screen, but it's not changing up there. Like on the screen there.
So it's advancing on the laptop, but it's not advancing on the actual monitor. Do we have somehow disconnect?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that because I'm looking at the screen, not looking at this, and I'm thinking everything's fine.
Well, this is great. We have broadband issues in the broadband session.
So I was watching the back of your
it's not going
presentation.
through.
No, if you see, it's not advancing across, but it might just be, does it need to be in presentation mode?
Maybe it has to bring up.
Maybe go to presentation and see if it'll present, or the monitor configuration, maybe it's not mirroring.
Right. Where are those mirroring properties? Yep. Where is that? Yeah.
Yeah, so while he's working on that, so, what this, it's a map that the federal government puts together that shows where the deployments are taking place, and there's a spreadsheet associated with that map. And it keeps track of all the funding that's being made available in tribal areas. And it changes, every week. So out of the $980 million that's made available, it shows the 83. It shows the 83 million that has been going today. You can see what tribes are receiving the funding.
I didn't go into settings.
So the funding would range from use and adoption, feasibility studies, and then most importantly for the broadband deployment. So out of
It changes
the,
here, but it doesn't change there.
So there was $980 million made available under this program, and the tribes filed applications that comprised of $5 billion in funding. So there's a request out there for $5 billion, but yet there's only $980 million available. So, the tribes aren't going to get everything they are looking for.
Okay.
We'll see how that ends up.
It's switching, but it's not switching here. So if you want to just look at
What's
this.
that?
It's switching.
Oh, I see.
But it's not switching.
Oh, okay. Okay, so here's that map. And I don't expect you to probably see it here because it's hard to see, but when you get a chance, you'll be able to go to this website and you can kind of track it. And probably most importantly, you can kind of see, whether your tribe or any other tribes are getting funding, how much they're getting, what it's for, and that's going to constantly change over time.
What is that website?
There's a long link to it, but you can, if you, I can either make it available, or yeah, I'll send you the presentation, you can kind of see what the present thing is. Also, at the end of this presentation, I have links to everything. You'll see there's a whole 2 screens of different links of information that I'm referencing during this presentation that you'll be able to kind of go and get after. So that's the tribal broadband program. I'll give you an example of one issue that came up. I was helping a Midwest tribe obtain funding, and they also wanted to work with a service provider. So it's kind of a win-win situation potentially, because the service provider had the expertise of building out a fiber wireless broadband network, and the tribe wanted to leverage that expertise, and the service provider wanted to use the tribal funding to help pay for the cost of the services. So it seemed like it could be a win-win, but what happened was that they just came at this with different perspectives. The tribe wanted to make sure that the people got good service at a discounted price. There was tribal laws that had to be complied with. There's a tribal political system that had to be recognized. And in the end, they couldn't come to an agreement, which was really unfortunate, because I personally thought it would have been a win-win for both. But the good side is the tribe went ahead and submitted the application on their own, and hopefully they'll get funding. But it does highlight some of the problems that, as you well know, of the tribe's working with service providers, because again, it goes back to that original screen where people come at this with different perspectives.
Can you speak in the mic?
Oh, sure. So it comes at, everyone has different perspectives, so it's hard sometimes to, create these win-win situations, even though I think they exist. The next opportunity out there for funding is the high-cost fund that the FCC has established. You've probably heard of it before. It's just called the High Cost Fund, or the Connect America Fund. And this is a good fund too, because what it does is it makes funds available on a continuous basis for not only capital expenditures but operating expenditures. Obviously that's good, and the companies that have taken advantage of this funding, mostly the incumbent local telephone companies. So in that situation, that's mostly the outside. Is the only one incumbent local telephone companies that exist that are tribal are a few in Arizona, and one in New Mexico, and I think one in South Dakota. And I'll show in a bit, what that means. Because even though technically the funding is available to anyone that provides service in these high-cost areas, the reality of it is that it's not being made available to tribal entities. But this fund is made available, and the FCC is constantly updating the funds and the funding mechanisms to make it more available to different interest groups. This kind of highlights that point. So in California, you have, these are all the telephone companies that are receiving high-cost funding. And then you see then below, I'm not sure if you can read it, but basically what it does is it lays out all the funding that's being made available to telephone companies providing service in rural areas, how much high-cost funding they're receiving. And then in the bottom, I highlighted the tribal entities. Now, there's 110 approximately federally recognized tribes in California. You can see none of them are getting any high-cost funding. Now, the reason for that is that they're not considered telephone companies. Now, they could be, but they're not, or they haven't established telephone companies. But it does kind of highlight the fact that this high-cost fund that's made available at the FCC is largely going to the incumbent telephone companies, not to tribal entities that get established in tribal lands to provide service. Arizona is a little different because there are approximately, 6 or 7 tribally owned telephone companies that are the incumbent local telephone companies. So they're receiving funding, but you know, it's a kind of a fraction of what the total amount is that's received by non-tribal telephone companies. A lot of this is historical just because the way the system was established, it was always the local telephone companies, the old AT&T companies that were receiving the funding, and then gradually the system has changed. South Dakota is another example. A lot of telephone companies, only one or two are tribal-owned companies, and they are receiving money, but again, it's this very small fraction. And you know, if you've been to these places, these are very rural areas that you know, don't have very good service, telephone or broadband service. You would think more funding would be made available to them. But you know, that's part of the problem with the high-cost fund, is that the way it was set up and the way it's evolving hopefully fixes some of these issues, but there remains a disconnect between the funds that are being made available to incumbent carriers and funds that could be made available to tribal entities. And you know, I think one opportunity that exists out there is for the tribal community to lobby the FCC to make funds available for tribal lands, to do set-asides. Now that has happened in like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, so you'd think, why are they treated separately? But they are. They're treated separately. And this just briefly, it's hard to tell what this is, but it's a map of South Dakota, and this is a map of AT&T showing where they have coverage, and everything blue is covered. Now, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is right there, and I highlight that because I've been there numerous times and there's no coverage out there. I go out there all the time and there's no coverage yet. The map shows there is. Now, why is that problematic? Well, it's because the FCC and policymakers use these maps that are prepared by incumbent providers to make funding available. So they're not going to make funding available where there's existing coverage. So in this case, they don't make funding available on some of these reservations, tribal lands, because according to the maps there's coverage, but in reality there's not. So again, that highlights that disconnect that exists between reality and what the different perspectives of carriers are. AT&T may not, I'm not saying that they're purposely showing a map that isn't correct, but I think they know that you know, this is a theoretical map. And an example is, you know, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is, you know, what, the second largest, third largest reservation in the country. It's larger than what, the state of Delaware, I think. I think there's 10 cell sites, and supposedly they have complete coverage on Pine Ridge. Delaware has, I think, what, 1,000 cell sites? So how can that be? Lifeline and ACP support is another program that's out there, and you've probably heard of this one because it gets publicized quite a bit, including more recently in TV and radio ads, ACP, because what Congress did as part of COVID relief is they made funding available to provide discounts on broadband service. And they did $75 a month per household in tribal lands, where non-tribal lands were getting $30 a month. So they did, Congress did try to take the additional steps of making things affordable. And so what they did is they created this program, and it allows you to provide discounts to households now. It's not individuals. So sometimes, as you know, there may be 20 people in a household, and they may be multiple families, but only one in that household would be eligible for service. So another solution is targeted funds for schools and libraries. Where that's important is that if you make funds available, what Congress did and the FCC implemented is they have these programs where they'll fund like a fiber connection to a school or a library. And that could be very helpful, because not only does a school and library get the funding to have that broadband connection, but they also, people can use that broadband connection to expand upon and bring service to other areas. So it's a good program to take advantage of. In all these programs, you can piece them together to get the full funding that you would need to successfully deploy a broadband network and make services available. Here you can do an alliance with service providers, as I mentioned before. That exists today. I think Navajo has an alliance with a telephone company down there. NTOA Wireless is a joint venture between that wireless company and the tribe. Those are few and far between, but is something that is available. The commercial business arrangements, those are few and far between, but there are instances where the interests match up and you can make things work between a commercial enterprise and a tribe. In the last few pages, I've kind of went through this quickly just because I don't want to take up too much time here, but this may be most helpful, not now, but when you get back and you want to look at some of the things that I referenced. So you have the map is there, the top one here. The California has an advanced services program. You have the FCC high cost program, Lifeline, E-rate, broadband. So all the information could, hopefully is at your fingertips, and you can kind of go through it as you see fit. And feel free to approach me afterwards. I'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation. Thank you.
Turn these tall people. How's it going, everybody? Are we in the post-lunch coma? Okay. And it's warm in here, so that's a bonus. I'm curious, I'm trying to figure out what my crowd is. How many of you are a California tribe or representative of a California tribe? Okay, small handful. Cool. So a lot of this is going to be really relevant. And then, where are the rest of you from? Just kidding. That's hard to do. Alaska. Just, yell it out. Alaska. That's all Alaska? So California, Alaska.
Navajo Nation.
Navajo. Nice. All right, that's cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, the national picture, which will be relevant for everybody, and then I'm going to focus a little bit on California, what they're working on, because obviously we have some representation here, but it's relevant to your states as well. It may not be happening in your state, but it might be something that is worth looking into. And then I'm going to share a couple of websites that disappeared. So I'm just going to type them in for a second. So I am Matthew Rantanen. I am the Director of Technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. I've been there since 2001, so 21 years now. And we have built a high-speed wireless network that was serving broadband to 17 of the reservations. Tribal Chairmen's is now 25 tribes together. And we brought fiber in to serve that wireless network over the years and have, 1,500 transient users that come in and out of after-school programs, 105 tribal municipalities connected, a little over 400 homes connected on those reservations. We were the first tribal consortium to really solve the E-rate problem, how to get access to the E-rate funding for tribes, and we shared that. 20 years later, the FCC decided to change the rule and let tribes allocate or identify their own libraries for the first time, but we found a workaround 20 years ago. So I've been in the space for a long time. I've been with the National Congress of American Indians for 9 years, the co-chair of their Tech and Telecom Subcommittee, so really creating policy that we take to DC and deal with a bunch of issues. Gene highlighted a lot of the things that are happening at the federal level, and I wanted to kind of touch on a few key numbers. At the end of Obama's administration, I worked with the CTO of the United States to identify why don't we have access to broadband on tribes, right? You can build your own network, but what's the missing link? Where's the piece that's gone? That missing piece is called middle mile fiber, right? That's the thing that connects your community to the rest of the world, right? That's that last little bit of fiber that needs to happen. There's 8,000 missing miles in the lower 48, right? California has 1,800 of those miles, missing miles. There's 109 tribes in California. So, and Alaska is a whole nother problem because you have Alaska. The type of environment you have in Alaska, it just doesn't cater to that kind of infrastructure, right? So you really almost need to be offshore in Alaska and coming back onshore multiple times with subsea cables to make this work, and then doing a couple of big crisscrosses through the state to make it happen. That still needs to be solved on a desktop engineering level, but then also in a practical space. But with 8,000 missing miles in the lower 48 states, it's approximately $1 billion problem, right? So what did we get from NTIA last year, at the end of last year? $1 billion. Well, that's $1 billion to build what? Not the middle mile problem, that's $1 billion to build your network at your tribal level. But what do you do about not being able to connect to the rest of the world? So there's clearly already a pre-existing deficit. So we did some desktop engineering, myself and a couple of other experts with the White House, and figured out at the time, this is 2016, we had about a $7 billion problem, not including the middle mile, right? So really it's an $8 billion problem, or a ballpark, of how much is it going to cost for all of our reservations to have access to broadband, build networks, connect to the rest of the world. Add inflation, add the timeline, 6 more years, add the lack of availability of product and price increases, and now you're somewhere in the $10 billion range. How do we know we're accurate on that? Well, when the first $1 billion came out, $5.84 billion was asked for by 305 tribes. So right there, you only have about half the tribes asking for more than half of the proposed $10 billion problem. So we have $2 billion more coming down the pipe in that same place. So really, we're effectively looking at a third of the solution in funding. So how are we going to figure out the $7 billion that's missing? In that last piece of legislature, we had it at $6 billion, but somebody did a trade in the 11th hour and took $4 billion of it out of the way. So we would have been at 7. So are we going to get another windfall of cash out of the federal government? Highly unlikely, especially with the new midterm elections and then the potential changeover at the next administration. So how are we going to solve these problems? Well, in the state of California, California has chosen to use its federal dollars, $6 billion of its federal dollars, and apply that to build out infrastructure for broadband. So $3.25 billion of that is middle mile architecture, or infrastructure. So they're building, think of the Olympic symbol, right? The 5 circles that overlap, and duplicate that all over California, right? To fill up the gaps where there's no fiber. If there was more money, which it needs to be more money, it would be smaller circles and way more of them. But that's how you basically build fiber infrastructure, is concentric rings that touch, that encircle an area, because if you chop the fiber in half here, this group can go this way, this group can go this way, and they still have access to the internet. And the fiber gets chopped by backhoes and road projects and things all the time. So California is dedicated to $3.25 billion. They just added another $500 million to that, so we're at 3.75. The rest of that money is for last mile. So my current job, I'm on loan from Tribal Chairmen's Association to the Golden State Network, which is California's advisory to this. I'm working with the tribes in California. So if I have not worked with you yet, come grab my business card at the end of this, and I will be working with you. I've been making the rounds in California and trying to make sure that I understand your needs based on what's being built and how do we make those things come together. So in the states that are not California, I hope that your state is doing the similar things with their federal money, because their federal money can be allocated to tribes. Their federal money can be allocated to infrastructure that supports tribes. So you can, and Gene talked a lot about lobbying, you can actually lobby your state or educate, as I do in my position, those folks that need to understand better what needs to happen for Indian country. And in your state, you can potentially leverage those federal dollars to be allocated to where tribes can get access to them, or at least benefit on some level, like from a middle mile build out, or or something on that level. So, and I'm a casual speaker, so I'm going to open it up. If you want to ask questions on the way through this, please just fire them off, raise a hand. But I think we need to do it on a microphone because I think this is being recorded, or it's being broadcast. So if you want to step up, just step up to the microphone. That'd be awesome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Welcome to our world about the technical difficulties there.
Right? It's a PC on
Well,
the
I
Mac
come
guy.
from Alaska, and I'm from Council of Athabascan Tribal Governments, a consortium of 10 tribes. We live in the interior of Alaska, and we have tribes up into the Brooks Range. And I'd like to address inequity of services. One thing is when COVID first started, our EHS program in DC, they said, oh, just go on Zoom, and that's not available to us because the hookup in rural Alaska is $4,000 a month.
Yep.
As just the hookup, and then $389 a month thereafter. And so we have to make life choices since we live mostly a subsistence lifestyle. We have to make choices like, is it food or internet? Is it clothing for our kids or internet? Is it electricity or internet? So we have all of these hard choices that we have to make. And this is really interesting because for the federally recognized tribes, we comprise 39% of the federally recognized tribes with no services. I just saw 3 little dots up there for Alaska, and I just wanted to thank you for advocating for us, by the way, not only for California, but for the rest of the country. And the cost is so astronomical in Alaska. I hope that in the future that we could all work together in order to make the services more equitable. Thank you.
Yeah. Did you have a specific question of me? Because I can address maybe solutions.
Actually, I think this is the reality of life that they need to hear. Everyone needs to hear.
Okay.
The inequity of services. Like how many tribes you're representing in California,
Yeah.
and I saw 3 little dots up there on that on the Alaska thing, and that's really unfair because we're 39% of the federally recognized tribes.
What were the 3 dots? What had been allocated? Okay, so those 3 dots were representing the allocation of NTIA funding so far. And as Gene displayed, 980 million available to that first round, and they've only allocated 91 million. So they haven't even gotten to 10% yet. Just FYI, they're over 200 days past their congressionally mandated release date of that funding. So we are all waiting to find out what our opportunities are there. And it's obvious if you have $1 billion and people ask for 6, how do you do that? I mean, it's a horrible task. They don't have the money to be able to deploy what they need to deploy. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying the math doesn't work. So however they deploy it, we're all going to be unhappy. And I just don't know where we find the deficit to fill up the next $7 billion that needs to happen. But that's what we're actively trying to do, and that's why I'm saying working with your state can be one of those leverage tools to maybe bring in an extra $1 billion here and there, because the state does get federal funding that they can allocate towards tribal. Yes?
Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Diana Zerl. I serve on the Kenai Tribal Council in Kenai, Alaska. And we had joined a consortium, actually formed a consortium of 2 of our tribes. And as we were looking at the NTIA grant, a couple of things last year, I mean, it was like a nightmare on some of the requirements that they had. And I'm trying to think of the code, but one of the requirements, we couldn't even get the application process by them to get that, so you could begin the grant application.
Right.
So made the choice not to apply at that point and are looking at whether we will in the next go round and so forth. But and I really appreciate your advocacy and the knowledge that you have, and I'm going to be coming up and getting your cards from both of you, because I think it's really, as we look at that grant, it's very obvious. You call it the incumbents, I call them the capitalists out there that already have the money, and that's where that money, even in Alaska, went. There may be a little bit of overlap, like in the Bristol Bay area. I'm not familiar with their services there, that might be part of the corporation, the tribal corporation, or the ANC there. But that there's a significant amount of points that are applied to that as if you have existing services. And so you gave us broadband, but how are we going to get the capital to get there? We can't.
Catch-22, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a real catch-22, chicken and egg scenario. We've been struggling with that.
Yeah.
So the advocacy, and building on that and being able to participate in that advocacy, I think is really critical.
So,
and I know it's not a question per se.
well, I have a couple things for you. There is Treasury money that I think expires this month in about 2 weeks. So apply for that. It's $167,500 to do the planning and the prep work for the IIJA.
Exactly.
So apply that money to your application process and get an application in for IIJA.
Right, and we have received some of that.
Okay.
But again, it's that part of it, but the infrastructure is part, where we're struggling with the capital side of it. And so, but I appreciate that, and I'm aware of that one too.
Did you get your 2.5 gigahertz license when you did the tribal
we
priority?
had those right on.
So
right
that's
back
a
in.
bankable asset that you can borrow money against.
Yes.
So, as well.
Thank you. But again, it's the borrowing and not the grants.
Right.
And again, it's just like,
Right.
why did you give us this, but yet you're not going to help fund it? And I understand we're not all a free-for-all, but the other, so a couple of things on the grant also. So it's like they didn't even look at their grant process. It's living in the decades past and knowing that certain groups will be able to be eligible for XYZ and the points and be higher on the scale because they're existing and already, the telecoms or the telcos and so forth are already out there with it. And so when they approach us for partnerships, and I'm not surprised that the Midwest Tribe didn't go with it, because our needs are different than their needs, and it's like, well, we'll take your broadband, and we'll give you free, quote unquote, free internet, but it doesn't approach all the other issues of getting equipment out. And so how to get past those, some of those blocks in applying for it, because as I understand the NTIA grant, it is basically you apply and whatever you get at that point, you're not going to be able to apply again for that grant. So it's just frustration. So I really do want to pick your brains on that, because there's, as she said, there's so many inequities.
Well, there's a couple things I can address to help you with that. So.
Okay.
But go ahead.
I apologize.
Go ahead.
And one of the other things on the application is the distance. So we're within 100 miles of Anchorage in our case. And even some of the other remote areas are within that 100 miles. And it's not realistic, because 100 miles in Alaska versus 100 road miles to a place is a whole big difference in how we provide service up there. Right. So again, I apologize, I'll let somebody else speak, but.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that we don't work for the Fed.
I understand that. I'm not saying you.
No, these questions should be addressed to NTIA staff, which is Adam Geisler and his team, specifically, and I'm not sure if you've had that venue.
Well, we've already been addressing it with Murkowski and
Good, but let me touch
Sullivan's
on a few things that you mentioned, and then we'll let some other people jump in.
Yep.
But specifically, apply for IIJA, use the funding that's available at Treasury, to do your planning, to hire consultants to do that work if you don't have people on staff or engineers on staff, and get a solid plan together for when IIJA comes out, and apply for it. Fingers crossed you get some of that money, but when you build it modularized so that you get some of the money, you can build part of it, rather than it all depends on this one linchpin and you can't have it at that point if you don't get all the dollars. The other thing is, and this is something we've been promoting from the National Congress of American Indians, from the Tech and Telecom, is that own the asset, right? You're spending your federal dollars to build this infrastructure. Don't hand it off to somebody, the incumbent, so that they can own it. Have them rent it from you or use the infrastructure. Use it as a lure to bait your trap, to bring them in to serve your end customer, but don't give it away to them. Own the asset. Well, it's happening, right? It's happening throughout the U.S. Tribes are choosing to leverage their federal dollars to buy the infrastructure, have incumbent blue or incumbent red build it, and then letting it go with that incumbent and not actually owning the infrastructure. So if incumbent blue goes away or starts charging you $1 million a meg, how are you going to survive that? When you own the infrastructure, you can say, oh, I don't want to use incumbent blue anymore. Wipe them off the map. Let's put it out for bid and bring up another one. So, you know, owning that infrastructure is key because it is also then a bankable asset moving forward, right? So you have the 2.5 gigahertz. Some of us were lucky enough to get 2.5 gigahertz tribal priority window application in. That is a network building tool, but it is also a leverageable asset for borrowing, right? It's also a leverageable asset for trading. Because who wants that? Sprint, T-Mobile, and Dish Wireless, right? They want 2.5. That's how they're deploying their 5th generation network. So if you don't really know that you're going to use it, but you have it over your tribal land, there are deals right now that are pretty favorable where if you don't like that spectrum, you can trade them for more like cellular spectrum, 600 megahertz. I'm going to get geek speak for a second, but cellular network spectrum works better for deploying to tribal houses than 2.5 does. They're not using it over your land because they don't have a network over your land, but they would love your 2.5, do a trade, right? There's things like that that can happen. You can also build money into that process. You can have them do the installation and the work on it. There's a lot of leverage points there, and if you then own the assets, then you're in a good spot. Hang on a second, let me see what kind of minutes we have left. All right, we have like 5 minutes left. So anybody else have questions? And Gene can jump in on these too. But I wanted to put this website up while I'm sitting here. I'll just plug it real fast. So during COVID, we didn't have the ability to bring people onto the reservations to do training, right? So you didn't have access to resources because of COVID. You didn't want to infect the tribe. So my friends and I decided to do something crazy. We just brought everybody to my house in Southern California, and we did these tribal broadband boot camps. So we've been doing these. We did 2 at my house. We did one on the Yurok Nation. You saw the chairman speak earlier today. We're doing one at the University of Oregon next week. We'll be doing one, we think the Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico, and then another one back in my house. So this is a resource for folks that want tribal training and a network of tribal people building networks to rely on to actually do stuff. And then go ahead with your question, sir, and I'll type in another one.
I heard 10 billion was the number that we need for Indian country.
Ish.
Yeah. And I was just curious on just looking at valuations. What from what your research is the total that's been built? Like, you know, the AT&T's, the Sprint. I mean, it's in the trillions.
How much exists today?
Yeah, how much is it? Just
10 billion?
benchmarking us against the rest of.
Oh, I don't.
I mean, you obviously have the world, but the United States and just
billions.
Yeah.
And billions and billions. I don't know what that number is, but it's insane. But if you think about a reasonable network that brings a broadband solution to every home on your reservation and every tribal municipality, that's how that thought process went about. Bringing fiber backhaul to the rest of the world and serving the community times 574 nations, plus the complexity of what you have to deal with in Alaska for the middle mile. And there was a ballpark reached because we wanted to know how far up the scale we were. It's not accurate, but we know we're in the ballpark. So what they've put into infrastructure today in like AT&T's network is hundreds of billions of dollars, if not maybe $1 trillion. I don't know how far that is, and they've rebuilt the network, let's call it 5 different times as technology has changed, which some of us that have been building networks now for 20 years are realizing we're rebuilding our networks to stay current with speeds and stay current with process.
That's where all the growth is happening.
Yeah, that's right. No, and it used to use wireless, and now everybody's trying to do a fiber solution, and that's hard to do on reservation in the first place. But can you scale wireless? Can you scale capacity and such? And I think we're just about out of time. But did anybody else have?
Right here.
Sure.
My name is Irvin Jim, and I wear a couple hats in Alpine County. I'm a District 3 supervisor for Alpine County, smallest county in the state of California.
Okay.
But I'm also the chairman of my community. I represent the California side of the Washoe Tribe of Nevada in California.
Oh, cool.
And we have done the Middle Mile project that you speak about is in Alpine County. We took that money from the Golden State
California Advanced Service Fund?
Yeah,
CASF grant?
we took all that money and we threw it back at them through RCRC. Rural
Okay,
County
yeah.
River, and we're using that money to help facilitate another hat that I wear in California. I'm the board president for the Intertribal Council of California.
Oh, cool.
And we have, a lot of the tribes that you speak about.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get all this funding for that middle mile to go to the tribes that are not gaming tribes to help them facilitate this connection to their houses. So that's when, and I would like to speak to you afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's trade information because we have lots to talk about because there is an opportunity to support California's network going into Nevada. As we all know, internet does not follow state borders. It needs to go into other states to be resilient and better. So your tribe is strategically placed for that maneuver. And I think that might close out our session. I think we're timed out, and I think we got a line out the door. So this is the Tribal Resource Center.net. Write that down. There are oodles of resources and information there. If you're trying to get your head around a broadband project, or what do I do next, or how do I get started on stuff, there's a bunch of stuff here. This is funded by Internet Society, and it's at People-Centered Internet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gene. Yeah.